This build is on another level when it comes to endgame content in Destiny 2. Today we're breaking down an extremely powerful build, Lucky Pants and Malfeasance, in the Grandmaster Corrupted, but there is a twist, a variation to this build that is extremely powerful, and we'll get to that in just a moment. First things first, I'm going to break down the exact subclass that I was using here. For the super, I chose to use Golden Gun because we had one person on our team using Div. If we had no Div on our team though, I would instead go with Blade Barrage. But when you got that Div on your team, the Golden Gun is super powerful and super potent, especially at killing Sadia fast and efficiently, so you can actually skip one of her phases when you're at the top platform there. I highly recommend you do this, as you can see just how powerful it is in the gameplay behind me here. For the dodge, of course, we're going with Gambler's Dodge. When we dodge near enemies, we're going to get our melee back, and while we will utilize our melee in some smaller ways, this really is not the focal point of this build. The jump, triple jump for PvE. I went with Knife Trick personally, the main reason being that it scorches targets, and we're going to pair with that, of course, Ember of Torches, so that way every time we throw that knife, we become radiant. If we get a knife kill, we'll instantly get our knives refunded due to the knock 'em down solar aspect, a gameplay loop that I've talked about extensively in my other Solar Hunter builds, so I'm just going to gloss over it quickly here. For the nade, we're going to go with Healing Nade, just so we have a panic button in case we get into a tight pinch. And for the last aspect, we're going with On Your Mark, so that way we get an extra fragment slot. For the fragments, the first one I did choose was Ember of Mercy. Now keep in mind that there is a restoration timer bug. Bungie has acknowledged this and said that they're working on it for a mid-season fix, but just be mindful out there that if you do get restoration, it might end up lowering your timer based on what you do, so just be weary of the restoration timer magically disappearing. I still chose this solar fragment even with the bug just because the 10 resilience is nice, and getting restoration after reviving one of your teammates that dies in the GM, because that's going to happen a lot because it's a GM, is a really nice added benefit. The next fragment I chose was actually Ember of Benevolence. This is one that I don't use a whole lot, but if I give my teammates restoration by throwing my healing nade, or if I give them radiant by throwing my knife, it's going to give me increased grenade, melee, and class ability regeneration for a short duration. And since I am frequently throwing the healing nade at myself and my teammates and throwing those knives nearby allies, giving them radiant, I felt like this actually complemented the build decently well. The next fragment was Ember of Torches, like we mentioned earlier, and then we have Ember of Singeing, which is your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets. I'm obviously scorching targets by throwing my knife trick at people and then getting it back as fast as possible by dodging near enemies, which then in turn gets me my class ability back faster due to Ember of Singeing, creating a really nice gameplay loop there. And then lastly, we have defeating scorched targets grants melee energy and creates a fire sprite. Now picking up that fire sprite will grant me grenade energy as well, so I throw my knife at targets. I can then defeat them with Malfeasance, for example, which will then create a fire sprite that I can pick up and refund myself some more grenade energy. So that's the gameplay loop for abilities for you. Now moving on to the weapons, I chose of course Malfeasance because it's super powerful, especially against taken combatants. Its damage output rivals that of power weapons, especially when you get the timing of Lucky Pants down right. How this works, and to give you a sort of simplified explanation, is that you don't want to run around with your Malfeasance out at all times. Instead, when you're running from area to area, have out your Cartesian coordinate or your power weapon, and then as soon as you get into combat, swap to that Malfeasance, light up all the enemies until your magazine is a little bit past half full, then reload the weapon, and then proceed to fire your Cartesian or your linear fusion until your out of luck debuff timer finally runs out of time, and then at that point in time you can swap back to the Malfeasance, which will be fully reloaded, and then you'll be able to start doing that insane hand cannon DPS again. That's a really nice gameplay loop that saves you a ton of special ammo and a ton of heavy, which is why this build is so powerful and so potent. But you don't only have to use Malfeasance. Like I mentioned earlier, you could actually use a different exotic hand cannon, and I am talking about the Sunshot here. Sunshot was really good actually with Lucky Pants. You can see some of the gameplay behind me here. I know it's a little unorthodox to use something that isn't Malfeasance, but Sunshot did such good damage, and it actually synergizes perfectly with this build, because when you ready a fully loaded hand cannon that deals kinetic damage or a damage type that matches your subclass energy type, i.e. I'm using a solar class and I'm using a Sunshot, each hit from that hand cannon increases the damage of the next shot for a short duration against a combatant, which is why we use 180 RPM hand cannons when using Lucky Pants, because they have such a fast fire rate. If you were conversely to use a very slow fire rate hand cannon, you wouldn't benefit from the damage increasing perk from Lucky Pants nearly as much. So that's why Sunshot is still an excellent choice, because it's the only 150 RPM hand cannon in the game, so it does fire really fast, not quite as fast as a 180, but it's the very next closest archetype to a 180 RPM, giving it really nice synergy with Lucky Pants. So if you want to try something different or unique, you can give that a try. The mods are as follows. Like I've mentioned before, for all my GM builds, we have Heavy Ammo Finder and Heavy Ammo Scout. That way I create a ton of heavy ammo by getting exotic primary weapon kills, and then every time I find heavy ammo, I give it to my teammates because of Heavy Ammo Scout, and then I'm going to have Kinetic Siphon on, so that way as I'm spamming all of these Malfeasance shots and clearing ads, we're just creating tons and tons of orbs, giving myself and my teammates increased weapon damage and giving us more ability regeneration. The mods on the gauntlets are as follows. We have Kinetic Loader, Impact Induction, and Focusing Strike. Kinetic Loader, so that way my malfeasance reloads a little faster. Impact Induction and Focusing Strike both focus on doing melee damage and giving you class ability and grenade energy. I'm obviously not going to cause any damage with my healing nade, so I have to lean into my melee damage for getting my ability loop regeneration. For the chest piece, at least for Corrupted and most GMs, I do recommend Rainbow Resist and to not get too close to enemies because they will obviously mess you up if you get right up in their face. For the boots, I chose to go with Recuperation so that way I have a little more survivability, pick up that orb, stay alive, a Kinetic Weapon Surge to buff my malfeasance damage, and then a Solar Weapon Surge to buff my Cartesian Coordinate and my Briar's Contempt damage, or conversely my Sunshot damage. And lastly, on the class item, we went with Powerful Attraction. This is so good, especially for hunters, because you get your class ability back faster. Time Dilation is something I almost always use in Grandmaster, so that way my weapons are always getting that increased weapon damage buff from those surge mods that we have on our boots. And then lastly, I just went with Bomber so I could get a little more grenade energy back. So that way I always have that healing grenade in my back pocket in case both my teammates die and I need to get out of there and stay alive. For the stats this time, we're going with 100 resilience, of course, like any challenging content, we want to have 100 resilience, and then 100 discipline just for those healing nades. After that, it's definitely important to get as much mobility as possible. If I could, I'd have 100, but unfortunately I could only fit 80 in there. And then after that, your stats really don't matter much at all. Recovery and strength would be the best, with intellect being the least most important stat, but also not completely meaningless, because it is nice to obviously get your super back faster. But this is the stat distribution that I had with this build and the gameplay you see here behind me. Now for the artifact mod in season 23, we actually don't have a ton of mods that complement a build like this, unfortunately. The best one that I can see here is Heart of the Flame, which is casting your solar super, grants nearby allies radiant, and increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. So that's really nice for your golden gun, makes it much more powerful. And obviously giving my allies radiant will tie into my fragment, which is Ember of Benevolence, giving me more grenade, melee, and class ability energy for a short duration. And the last two artifact perks that you'll want for this build will definitely be from Whence You Came, so that way you do more damage to taken and scored combatants. I don't need to explain why that's so good. Lastly, you will want Wished Into Being as well when your super is nearly fully charged. All of those melee kills I get will create Orbs of Power, a very good artifact perk this season, and one that will actually synergize with this build pretty well. The rest of the mods won't really matter much because we're not really using our solar weapons to get precision kills, but I should mention that I do have Kindling Trigger on here, which is Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants, which could cause ignitions when I'm shooting my fusion or linear fusion at a champion or a boss. And that's everything for the artifact mod and this build in its entirety. If you want to copy this exact build and use it in the GMs just as I am in this gameplay here, the dim link will be down below. If you click on that link, it will equip everything for you, creating the build for you simply and easily. I hope you have a lot of fun and find this build to be helpful in the Grandmasters and any other content in the game right now, because it is super lethal and super potent. Turning your primary ammo weapon into a DPS weapon is crazy, and it's really only hunters that can do that. So if you're rocking hunter, I highly recommend that you give this build a try. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and subscribe, and click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. And if you're feeling thirsty out there, make sure to use code LUCKY10p to save some money on G Fuel. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch and Kick. I go live all the time playing Destiny 2. Lastly, make sure you're following me on X, Instagram, and TikTok, where I deliver Destiny 2 news to you daily. I appreciate all the followers out there.